Hey, good morning, Tali.
Good afternoon, Kay. How the heck are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it is early for you. I apologize for making this so early.
It's quite all right. You know, we got back on island last night and we took like a late flight. So I basically just like went to bed when I got home. I like actually got a decent, for me at least, a decent amount of sleep. So we're golden.
Okay, nice. So you're like midway. I would say you're on LA time, but you're like kind of acclimated to a 3 hour later.
That
later.
sounds right.
I don't even know how to like the. I understand it, but like you're ever so slightly more shifted to my time. Currently.
Yes. No, that feels right, especially because this is like, yeah, like I would have been down at breakfast. We were doing, like late-ish breakfast. I would have been down at breakfast if I were still in LA. So yes, I'm halfway to you. Did you feel closer to me over the weekend?
Yes, I could tell that you were on the same soil.
Perfect. I'm so glad.
Definitely. I was able to. I could feel it. Also, have you tried this watermelon 7-Up?
No, but I love watermelon.
It's delicious. Just
okay.
Share that with everybody.
I love watermelon and I love soda, so it really seems like that's something I would like.
It's really good. Yeah. So I think we're going to be talking to Counterpoints, Connor.
Yes.
In a bit. Oh, there. He has entered the studio.
Oh, wow. So prompt.
Speak of the devil, yeah. Hey there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure can.
All right, let's go. Let me make sure that my peeps can see you. And quick show before we get started. Like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them, full screen, and it looks like our audio is good. Cool. What are we fighting about today?
Everything.
Yes.
Fair. Let's do it.
Yeah, so basically, I shot Kay a message the other day after your stream, your conversation with Pisco. And I think, like people in your chat, I had some feelings about it. And, as per usual, Kay and I were on a very similar wavelength. And so basically, if I had to put two headers to it of my main gripes here, I want you to reconcile what I see as a contradiction in some ways of MAGA is number one emergency. We're sort of pre-fascist and we need to do everything to reduce the power of the Republicans, which is why we need to support Graham Plattner over Susan Collins, who is not meaningfully MAGA or fascist in any way. And yet you would vote for JD Vance in 2028 if he were up against Gavin Newsom. So I want you to square that, why a 2026 Senate candidate is worth.
Well, I think that comes from
not 2028.
I think that comes from actually like a misconception about my JD Vance thing. So Pisco likes to go on a fucking struggle session with me every few weeks and be like, aren't you just a liberal? Aren't you just a Democrat? Don't you love gay people? Don't you love the blacks? Like he just does that shit every couple of weeks. And so I was like, no, that there are like, so for instance, like in an election between Hassan, let's say we could clone Hassan Piker and he was eligible for the presidency or whatever. I guess he is actually. But let's say Hassan Piker was actually running for president of the United States and it was between JD Vance and Hassan Piker. JD Vance does many things that I think are objectionable and arguably like techno-feudalist and fascistic, but I don't think he hates the people of America, nor does he hate like the United States in general. He just thinks that he can advocate for its well-being through techno-feudalism. Whereas I think that Hassan Piker actually does view the United States as an evil empire that needs to crumble and be destroyed, and hundreds of thousands or millions of people being killed in this project doesn't matter, right? And so
that's true. That's a little too easy though, right? Because they're like I completely agree with you. I don't think you would get any pushback from me or Kay. We're both also voting JD Vance if it's between JD Vance and Hassan Piker. I'm assuming for Kay here, but I'm assuming that's likely true. Or maybe she'll plead the Canadian fifth right there. But that doesn't square it for JD Vance versus Newsom to me, because Newsom is not the same as Hassan Piker.
It doesn't. And oftentimes that was the struggle session in particular where people are still hitting me with the JD, you would vote for JD Vance quote. Because the JD Vance thing was, he was like, there's no circumstance where you would vote for JD Vance, right? And I was like, well, hold on. You know, JD Vance in 2016 was a never Trump Republican. He actually accurately called out Trump. He actually called out what Trump was going to do to the Republican Party. And so if JD Vance had a road to Damascus moment where he's just struck by the light of God, he realizes that he's complicit in the Trump regime sweeping, I know we don't agree on the Epstein files, but sweeping of the Epstein files in the Iran war, in the tariff regime. And he's like, you know what? I was a part of this, but this is so fucked up. I actually disavow all of this stuff. And here's my vision for the future of the country. And if I like the vision, then, and his and my vision were actually aligned, then yeah, I would vote for JD Vance over Newsom. Now, the stats of that happening are snowball's chance in hell, but of course it's still possible, which is what I was arguing with Pisco.
Okay, so it's a giant asterisk, basically.
Absolutely. And then Marco Rubio, I was split on, and I'll forward this argumentation because I think it'll get us further down the pipe faster. With Marco Rubio, I don't know if you saw his speech in Switzerland, but I feel like he took classic neoconservative talking points and classic Republican talking points, and he hybridized it with the national conservative philosophy of JD Vance. And so overall, I wasn't like totally hostile to Marco Rubio's speech. I actually thought it was pretty good. But my never Trump Republican friend, it's kind of like, you know, you have like a toxic partner, you know, like a toxic girlfriend or whatever.
Yes.
And so I was like, oh, maybe he's changed. Maybe I can go back to Marco Rubio. And then my never Trump Republican friend is like, no. He's sullied by the Trump administration. You can't go back. We have to destroy MAGA in 26 and 28 and burn it to the fucking ground. And I just think that I don't like it, but that's like a more principled position.
Yeah, I think well, I'll comment on that only briefly because I want to move on to the next part of your conversation with Pisco that I want to discuss. But yeah, I would want to be the other. I'm the angel, I guess. If North is your devil, is your never Trump devil in this case. JD Vance and Marco Rubio are not the same. I don't think the two of them compromise the same amount to get where they are today. And so I'm disappointed, but I like North a lot. And I think in some ways it's like he rides so hard to not be a Democrat, right? Like he would push back in a type of Pisco struggle session that you receive. And yet literally anyone who is willing to work with the Republican Party of the last 10 years is tainted or sullied in some way. So I think I think that is, especially if you more or less agree, like you're saying, with like where Marco Rubio is today, even if you wouldn't agree with necessarily every intervention or whatever, and not every intervention would happen under a different administration. But yeah, I think that's like, it's going to leave literally zero Republicans then. At that point, like you said, either someone has to do a full mea culpa and say, I was brainwashed and abducted by aliens and, then do a whole thing. Otherwise, literally almost no Republican would be eligible in a never Trump Republican's eyes. So I really hope that's not the direction that never Trumpers go when we're looking toward a post-Trump country.
Well, yeah, I also wonder if it's, sorry, go ahead.
No. Just like the emergency, like has to end at some point, right? Like there has to be like a period of time that comes where it's like where we're not, or like where the emergency voting against Trump isn't the like standard that is being used to make concessions that potentially wouldn't normally be made. So I'm just more curious on like, I guess when we're talking like about this, like when does the emergency end? And like it starts with Trump and then goes to like MAGA and then to someone like Susan Collins, who's like just a Republican, but not MAGA. So like, yeah.
Here's the question that I think we might be splitting on is, does the emergency end in 26 or does it end in 28? And so effectively North is saying 28, and I think you guys are leaning towards 26. And so effectively, like,
we don't think there's
Democrats...
an emergency, so we're a little bit disconnected there. But
we don't
see the same. We don't really see this as an emergency right now.
Hold on. So I want to press you on that a little bit. So obviously we did the Epstein thing last time, so I don't want to litigate that over again. But the Epstein thing is kind of a big deal. But wouldn't it be so fun? What's that?
I said, but wouldn't that be so fun?
No. so the Afiba Felix sex trafficking ring from 20 or 30 years ago is still a big deal to me. But let's just say that we don't agree on that one, and we hashed that out last time we talked. Sure. So the other thing that I think is something that's hard for me to walk away from, and I would really like to see how you square the circle. So for me, I am of the opinion that I'm not Christian anymore, but I was raised Christian, and I still try to carry a lot of that morality with me. And a lot of Republicans and conservatives claim to be Christian. And I don't know how we square that, the PEPFAR USAID cuts with a Christian perspective on reality. And just indulge me just a little bit, okay? Sure. So the PEPFAR USAID projections, which we'll know more about in the next 3 or 4 years, is that we were providing retroviral medication to Africans for $6.5 billion per year, and we were providing $30 billion of general aid to the planet. And because of these programs getting cut, there's going to be excess deaths caused by dengue, cholera, malaria, and HIV. And so the projections is that there's going to be between, I think they said the current projections are like 700,000 a year. So that'll add up to approximately 3 million. So between like 3 million and 14 million excess deaths as a result of these cuts. And we've cut 36 billion, right? And yet the Trump battleship is going to cost 200 billion. So we haven't saved money anywhere. We haven't done anything with the savings from PEPFAR and USAID. We redirected those funds into a vanity project for Trump. So how could we possibly be
those funds get
any morality whatsoever in this
specifically?
Scenario?
So this is sincerely a question because I don't know, but I ask it because I think a lot of people like to play slippery games in their sort of populist messaging as if all of this money is fungible when it's actually very strictly appropriated. So is it true that literally the money that was cut for PEPFAR funding is
It's not literally true that it was cut and then used for the battleship. I'm just using the battleship as an example of an extravagant expense.
Sure, but it also feeds into this populist lie, right? I mean, it's an oversimplification that misdirects people. I'm not saying that's your intention, but for people who don't have that
let's just deal with the $36 billion cut. This is 0.16% of the federal budget. It's projected to cause unnecessary death, which I know is different than the fucking Holocaust. In the Holocaust, you're literally lining people up and shooting them in the back of the head. But what we're talking about actually is we're talking about people who have HIV in Africa who are receiving a pill from the United States government. And then all of a sudden they can't get that pill and they're going to die in the next 5 years as a result. And it's not just them dying. Like you could just say, oh, well, they're African. It's not our responsibility. It's also some of them are pregnant. And so they're giving birth to new people who are going to have HIV. And so we're talking about reducing a communicable disease and its impact on the world. And we're talking about pennies on the dollar. I think I did the math on this, and effectively it saves the American taxpayer $35 a year. So you can now eat a Chick-fil-A meal because we say, like hypothetically, because we save this money. So yeah, but what's the advantage? We just fucked up our soft power in Africa for no discernible advantage.
No, and I don't necessarily like how they rolled back and took away the funding without, I guess, giving time for things to be reworked out. So it's not that I'm.
You're gonna take away the fish. You got to teach the man to fish first, right?
Yeah.
Even if you see that as more virtuous, you still need to do that intermediate part. Yeah.
You can understand that there are people in the United States who feel that money from the US going out to care for people elsewhere, while there are people within the country who are not getting the right allocation of resources, that they find that objectionable. And even if it's not the exact one-to-one trade-off, like, you can understand the overall sentiment, right? Like how people would want
100%.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't think that, yeah. But
my
talking
issue
about from a Christian perspective, just let me get back to that.
Sure.
Is that there would probably be nobody that like would be a good candidate for most people at that level of politics if we were going to truly hold those values like to a rigorous like standard, right? And I'm not saying Trump isn't quote unquote worse, but if holding that standard also like precludes everybody else, then I don't know
how useful is the standard.
This is my calculation, and bear in mind there's a lot of inference based off of this, is that Marco Rubio kind of saw the writing on the wall that regardless of whether or not Trump was going to be in charge, national conservative philosophy and populist rhetoric was going to be the future of the party. And so he just needed to make his peace with it. And so, becoming the head of the Department of State, he probably said, well, number one, I can because I'm a competent technocrat. I actually do think Marco Rubio is a relatively competent technocrat, excuse me. Maybe not number one, I can avoid Trump's worst blunders. I can buoy my political reputation, and I can therefore be prepared for a 2028 presidential run. And I think that was his calculation when he accepted the position. However, what ended up happening was he was told by Trump, we need to cut as much as we can. We're doing it through PEPFAR and USAID. I need you to execute. And as a result, predictably, there will be hundreds of thousands or millions of deaths as a result of these cuts. And so instead of doing what you have suggested, which I agree with, which is effectively a tapering off of, we are stopping PEPFAR and USAID. We have 4 years to get rid of this. We are looking for Eurasian partners to drop this $36 billion from our budget. And effectively, if after 4 years you don't step up to the plate, we don't give a fuck. We're done. It's your problem now. So effectively, we're going to keep these people employed for another year, maybe, but we need funding partners from the UN says it gives a fuck about the entire world. We need the UN or European partners or Asian partners or African partners to step up to the plate, because this is not American foreign policy anymore, right? And then that way you prevent all the excess deaths and you still get to offload the fucking problem. But that's not what Marco Rubio said. What Marco Rubio said is, yes, sir. And then he executed a plan that is causing arguably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths. And so that for me is like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, once again, I'm not like a Christian, but I still act as though I'm going to be accountable to the creator of the universe when I die. And so as a result, I don't know how you fucking like look yourself in the mirror after that.
Okay. It's hard because like if that is what keeps you up at night and like speaks to your soul the most, then like I don't know that I like could persuade you off of that. I think, and it's difficult because neither Kay nor I want to defend this. We don't want to defend the death of people, especially in the framing that you're putting it, right? Obviously. There is a difference, as you sort of hinted at the beginning, there is a difference between like not preventing preventable diseases, right, in a foreign country and like slaughtering people or even intentionally condemning people to die, right? These are like sort of different in kind things. And I don't know, I just think like, again, this is the example you're using is I think effective in this like online sphere because it is so potent, because we're talking about, you know, it like it reaches back into all of us, like the starving kids in Africa. We all were watching those like commercials, right?
Unfortunately, I think most people are desensitized to it, but please continue.
Sure. Sure,
Like,
maybe. But
I think
like,
a lot of people don't give a shit. I'm happy you guys are even partially receptive to this argumentation, because the truth is, conservatives don't give a shit. And then liberals know that conservatives don't give a shit, so they don't even use it as a talking point. It's actually wild how little it's talked about.
Maybe fair. I feel like it was talked about a lot, like a year ago. You're probably right that it's like it's people are bringing it up less and less. I think because to a certain extent it's being used as a cudgel. Like, if you support any aspect of the Trump administration, then you support the murder of millions of Africans, right? Of millions of HIV infested Africans. And so yeah, like no one really wants to jump on that bullet. But I think like
I think there's a more holistic way to look at it also, right? Like, so that is one aspect. And then there's other things that the administration is doing that people believe are going to bring benefit to people. So, I mean, it's all about trade-offs, right?
If you're a pro-life person, and like sincerely, you think that a inseminated egg, or like life begins at inception or whatever it's called,
conception,
then you can just go and the reason why you can go is because with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, there's arguably hundreds of thousands of less deaths of what you consider to be a person. And so yeah, sure, but like you would basically say, oh, well, for the PEPFAR and USAID people, they need to learn to fish anyways. And yeah, it might cause, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of deaths, but we haven't proved that out statistically, so who gives a shit? And on top of that, Trump gave us the repeal of Roe versus Wade by appointing conservative justices, which is going to save hundreds of thousands of American babies. And as a result, on the net, the Trump administration is going to save millions of lives. Whereas, yeah, sure, the Democrats would have kept going with PEPFAR and USAID, but number one, you could object to that on a moral level of you're just giving people fish, proverbially, overseas. And then you could also argue they would have perpetuated Roe versus Wade, and therefore hundreds of thousands of American babies would have been killed. But that's, for me, that argumentation works if you're like a very strict social conservative who believes that life starts at insemination, basically. And I'm not. So I understand the moral calculation that they're doing. I just don't agree with it.
Yeah, I guess it just seems to me like, and now again, I struggle with this one in particular because even the defense that Kay made, which I think is like the most coherent one, right? Sort of like people believe that there's a better use of those resources at home. I'm still averse to even that rationale because, again, I think it just speaks into the sort of nonsense collapsible populism messaging, like that, like we said here, the money isn't necessarily just being used at home, right? And I'm not against soft power, right? Like I'm not an isolationist, right? So that's not what I want to see as the future of the Republican Party either, even although I do want, I want smarter and stricter spending across the board, basically smarter and stricter taxation across the board in whatever vague sense I can put that out as someone who's not anywhere near an economist, right? But I guess like this is a point that Kay and I discussed before we got on screen, which I guess it kind of gets to like sort of like what is the limiting principle and is that actually being applied equally? Because I hear what you're saying, like as a sort of Christian yourself, right? There are failing Christians who are using their Christianity as a part of their sell on the left too, right? And we could say it's what they're doing is not as bad, right, or whatever. But again, it's like it's I think a lot of this does just depend on the loading. Even if we can acknowledge that Trump is the least Christian of the people who call themselves Christian, which that seems like a pretty easy bullet to bite. Like I'm okay biting that bullet. But and this is where it gets a little, I'm going to say something maybe a little bit controversial. And again, obviously I'm not a Christian myself. I'm not anti-gay myself, any of these things, but I'm going to use this as an example. It feels like a lot of people on the left will say, how, look at these basically bad Christians, right? They're allowing their brother humans, right, to die across the pond or whatever. But then they're calling themselves Christian while promoting same-sex marriage and promoting things that are just like obviously and explicitly against Christianity, but we're supposed to say that those contradictions of Christianity are righteous, moral, virtuous, and we should support all of that. But these sort of ways that I can frame this as a contradiction of Christianity over on this side is heretical, and that's it. And we need to,
it is fraught. It is unironically fraught. Because then you start getting into like debating scripture and theology, which weirdly enough, I have like a lot of fun doing, but I also understand it's like entirely subjective. But the subjectivity notwithstanding, what I do think is funny, if I was to try to steelman the pro-gay Christians, there's like probably two main places that like homophobia, as we could call it, is common. And it's effectively like in the condemnation of like Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament. And then it's also with, is it Saul who became Paul? It's the founder of the church. I think it's Saul who became Paul. And so Paul has like explicit, prohibitions against homosexuality in some of the letters that he's writing to the very early Christian churches. And so a lot of people accept him as like the founder of Christianity, but he himself is not Jesus. And so you kind of have to take this like heretical view that Paul is inspired by God, but not totally correct about everything, in order to arrive at like a pro-homosexual Christian position. I think it's possible, but you're doing a lot of mental gymnastics in order to get there. Sorry, I just wanted to play with the scripture for a second.
But my point, right, is you can just like lots of people are contradictory in their personal relationship with Jesus and whatever their whatever their religion is. And also,
an Orthodox person could just come up and say, yeah, but Paul was the founder of the church, therefore you should take what he says seriously. Shut the fuck up, you heretic. And that actually is a decently scripturally supported perspective.
Sure. And even again, as someone who I really know nothing about the New Testament, but as a Jew who has grappled with these questions, right, when I was coming to terms with my sexuality and speaking to religious Jews and stuff like this about this, like I even myself, as a mostly secular Jewish person in America, I cringe at the super sort of reform Jews basically who are trying to essentially change it. It's like of course I don't want people who are going to discriminate against me. And many of the most religious Jews that I've spoken to, their basic thing is, all of us are supposed to uphold these 613 commandments and we all fail. We none of us are upholding all of them every day, but we're all trying and we still love our brother and we still love our sister, but we want them to choose the harder path. I cannot like that and accept that it doesn't come with hate and oppression and all of these things, and it's not kicking people out of the family. And I find cringe the people who say, well, no, actually this is Judaism, that you and your wife who's not Jewish can come together and get married and we're gonna bathe her and then suddenly she's gonna be a Jew too.
You dilute it. You dilute it so far it's not even the original thing.
Exactly. So I think pious Christians can take umbrage with both sides of the aisle. I think if our limiting principle is they can being a hypocritical Christian,
then I think we get back to if we're getting past my personal sense of revulsion, which I think you've said, like, well, once you get into the upper echelons of politics, everyone's going to be a fucking sociopath because everybody's going to be doing these calculations. Or
they're dirty in some way.
What's the greater good?
They've got blood on their hands. And I hate that fucking loaded language. But yeah, right. In order, you're part of it. You have to make concessions somewhere. Yes. You're in the belly of the beast.
But I want to just acknowledge this conceptually, because I think that when I moral frog about PEPFAR and USAID, a lot of people just write it off as like, oh, he's just moral frogging. He's just using the Democratic talking points. And realistically, like, everybody has blood on their hands, so who gives a shit? But I do think that there's something to the nuance of calculation that we do with the quote unquote blood on our hands. So for instance, like the intervention in the former Yugoslavia, where Bill Clinton, allegedly because he was trying to impress his wife, who was pissed at him for cheating on her with Monica Lewinsky, in order to impress his wife, he did like a military peacekeeping operation in the former Yugoslavia without authorization from Congress. Now, if he set, weirdly enough, a bad precedent, or reinforced the bad precedent of the president of the United States getting involved in military conflict without authorization from Congress. And he did kill Serbs in that military action. But then also, if he hadn't killed Serbs, probably thousands of Serbs, then there would be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Muslim Bosniaks and Muslim Croats who would have been slaughtered because nobody else was stepping up to the plate. And so you're kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But then that's where I actually like to get into the calculation, because effectively, at least in my worldview, Marco Rubio said, well, maybe I'll be able to be a really good president and save lots of lives later. So I'll do what Donald Trump wants me to do now, and I'll condemn hundreds of thousands or millions of people to preventable death because I'm pursuing power. And that just feels like, yeah, of course, in a real politique sense, all the politicians at the upper echelon are going to do that. But then that speaks to like a level of like depravity that scares the fuck out of me, basically. I think you're muted on my end anyways.
I am, sorry. I hear you. And again, it's like, I don't even want to fight you on that so much, because this is not necessarily like, it's not my hill to die on, you know? And again, and I don't like the way that it's being used rhetorically, even by my quote unquote side. But like, I think what you're saying is valid if you believe in your heart of hearts, because this is all it comes down to. We're mind reading essentially, right? That's valid if you believe that actually in his mind is couple million Africans worth it for me to be elected in 2028. I have a hard, and again, maybe this is just the way that we are going to read politicians differently. I don't think most people would be so cavalier about something like that, or actually thinking about it in those terms, especially because, especially a year ago, but even I think now, really, we're basing this all on projections. This is projections of how many people might die if a whole bunch of things don't happen, you know, between now and then. And so yes, maybe he truly did see that as that's the calculation. Kill several million Africans to help pave my way to the White House. But I think that's a really cynical reading. I wouldn't put that type of reading on a Dem that I hate the most. You know what I mean? Because I really don't think that most people believe that. I don't think most people are framing it in like in the worst way that their opposition might frame it, and biting that bullet in how they make their decisions.
Well, and you know, as a former law enforcement officer, if I was to give the utmost charity to Marco Rubio, even while executing this move, effectively, like, there were things that I had to do as a law enforcement officer that I didn't like. And the reason why I ended up doing them was because I said, this ultimately isn't me. This is the law as written. I have a job to perform within certain parameters. I'm going to execute that job because even if I don't like what my duty is currently demanding of me, I think I am still pretty good at this fucking job. And I would prefer that I had to do the ugly thing so I could do the good thing later on, rather than not even have the opportunity to do the ugly thing. So maybe he's coping with it in a similar vein. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if he was. And to his credit, probably around the time that he was executing this, he actually looked like a Sith Lord. Like he looked like sallow and sad and depressed and anxious and angry. So maybe the fact that maybe this was weighing on his conscience and maybe it did fuck him up, but ultimately he did execute the move. Now here, but let's put my feelings aside because we could literally litigate Connor's feelings for the next hour. Let's just talk about the political calculation. So I think that it is possible, maybe even probable, that the Democrats at minimum they're going to do well in the House. They might take the Senate or get a 50-50 Senate. So it might be like 51-49 or it might be 50-50. And I think that that's actually reliant on Plattner and another person's election. So I don't know how that's going to shake. But effectively, then we have the lame duck period of Trump. And so we need to know what that looks like. And then we also need to wonder what would happen in 28. Because in 28, does J.D. Vance become the standard bearer of the MAGA movement? And he's literally just like a techno-feudalist, I'll be rude, cocksleeve that just apes Donald Trump's rhetoric in order to get power if he's the primary nominee? Or does Marco Rubio become like a fusion of neoconservatism and MAGA movement and national conservatism, which weirdly enough is probably perfect. And then it's like the perfect hybridization of my Republican politics and Donald Trump's politics. But then what does that look like? And what are the policy impacts of a Rubio presidency? Because it could be good. It could also be scary as fuck. So, I mean, what's kind of your calculation for what you want to see in 26 and what you want to see in 28?
I don't know exactly even where to start with that response. I guess like it has to be anchored in the fact that I don't feel that we're in a 10 alarm fire right now, right? So so especially if Marco Rubio is someone that I think would be even more appropriate as a leader and is more representative of the sort of traditional Republican viewpoint. So nothing you said there, like I'm not very nervous about a Marco Rubio administration, even if there would be things that would happen that I'm sure I wouldn't like, just like under any administration. So that doesn't freak me out. If anything, I'm most concerned that Marco Rubio is going to be like a polite little boy and not run like he said he wouldn't. He basically said, if JD Vance runs, I'm not going to run. I forget the exact wording, and I think this was like a one-time thing, and I hope he goes back on that. But I'm more concerned that he's going to say, and there could be like a rational, that this could be just for his own self-interest too. He might believe that he's not going to be able to pick off enough of like the sort of MAGA voters, right? That if he were to go up against JD Vance, that he would lose.
He's a technocratic nerd. So his speech in Switzerland, like it was almost like specifically written for simultaneously national conservatives and me. Which is like, you should not be writing a speech for me. Like I am such a heterodox political cross-section that trying to appeal to me is actually probably bad for your political career. So for instance, like what I would, if I was to articulate what I was worried about with a JD Vance or Marco Rubio presidency, I would be worried that MAGA-ism, the kind of like the promised isolationism of the MAGA movement, even though it's not being delivered, but that worldview of like America, not just America first, America only, fuck everybody else. I'm worried that would be continuing as a policy. I'm worried that because of the friends that he would have to make, the techno-feudalists, so Palantir, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and all that kind of stuff, they would basically be unshackled, which is cool for me. I get cooler like murder robots, but that doesn't make the world a better place. It's just like my 16-year-old love affair with the military industrial complex just gets satisfied by cooler murder robots, but that's not better for humanity. And then we continue on with the tax cuts.
We don't even know. We don't know that. Maybe having the cooler
JD
murder
Vance,
robot.
we kind of do know that he's Peter Thiel's cock sleeve. So
okay, sure. I thought you were saying JD Vance and Mark. Well, I was actually making a different point. I was making the point that like having the best murder robots might actually be sort of, in line with
fucking
sort of
love
like
murder
robots,
robots, but
but
sure.
My point is I'm saying we don't have evidence that you're trying to say like, even though I like it, it's obviously bad for humanity, but we don't know that that's true. Maybe this is the next realm of deterrence, right? That's going to actually keep the world a safer place.
Maybe we design amazing murder robots, and then instead of like bombing and killing like tens of thousands of Iranians, we can literally sneak murder robots into the underground nuclear facilities, collapse them on top of the nuclear stockpiles, and prevent a war.
We have not been murdering tens of thousands of Iranians, right?
Thousands?
You said tens of thousands.
Well, we're
not targeting Iranian
can I amend my
all.
statement for 1,000?
Sure. You
maybe
could,
with an S. The only reason why, so I'm amending around tens of thousands, because I don't think we've hit 10,000. And then I'm putting 1,000 ? S, just because I'm assuming that all of our targets are primarily military. So, I don't think
which matters too. And again, and which is something.
Listen, I'm a neocon apologist.
Yeah,
you can articulate it because my audience is gonna be like, "Fuck you, Tali, you fucking warmongering fascist." But I'm gonna love this because I'm gonna be like, no. We actually are pretty good at war.
Yeah, and I guess like maybe you're sort of touching on the next part of what I kind of took issue with in your conversation with Pisco is, you're basically, you want MAGA-ism to die. And that's your rationale for 2026 and possibly 2028 also, because it sounds like you were actually mischaracterized by saying that you would vote for JD Vance. You're basically saying if JD Vance un-JD Vanceified himself and
Yeah. If he was
did a Michael
JD
Cohen
Vance.
style, did a Michael Cohen style mea culpa, then at that point you would vote for him. So assuming that you wouldn't vote for him, assuming that he does not grovel to Connor, right, and that you wouldn't actually vote for him, you are driven by ending MAGAism. I think, and this is actually projection because this is based on my reflection of how I voted in 2024. I think that you are unintentionally engaged in accelerationism right now, or at least you're accepting an accelerationist path to kill MAGA. And I think even if what you're doing is righteous, I think it's not going to work. In the same way that part of my motivation in 2024 was I do not like where the Democratic Party is going. I don't like the direction. They need a wake-up call. They need to lose so that they know that the country does not support this. And what happened? They lost, and they wouldn't even acknowledge the reasons that I think that they lost, right? Sorry, it's only the economy, basically. If it weren't for the economy, Kamala obviously would have won, right?
Can you refamiliarize me with why you think they lost?
I don't think it's any one reason, but I think the woke cultural stuff absolutely played a role. I think people were sick of the direction. And I think I think the right seemed, ironically, the right seemed more accepting. The right seemed more chill. The right seemed more normal in a way that whether that's fair,
and you're talking about
not,
like 23, 24, right?
Yes.
See, so what's wild to me, because I feel like we went down a similar evolutionary path, but we did so at different times. So for instance, like I didn't vote for Trump in 2016 because he said some shit that was like extremely disqualifying. But for me, like the right wing seemed more memey and fun and contrarian and interesting, and at least they were coming up with like cool ideas or whatever. And so as a result, I was kind of like what I call the contrarian right. It's basically like, yeah, sure, the right's doing XYZ that's bad, but have you seen this fucking wild leftist bullshit that basically needs to be killed with fire? And that was my political perspectives, probably through January 6, 2021. And then January 6, 2021, I was like, fuck this. Like, this isn't funny. This isn't cute. This isn't something that I should be playing with. This isn't something that I should be doing apologia for. I'm fucking done with this shit. And so it's kind of weird to me that like the Biden years are the woke times where like woke was so infectious that it kind of destroyed you or made you not want to be a part of it anymore. Because effectively, like with the purchase of Twitter on 2022, I felt like woke was getting fucking annihilated. I just felt like woke was getting like digitally graped on the internet sphere because the Overton window through the purchase of Twitter had been so blown open. YouTube relaxed its terms of service. Instagram arguably loosened some of its terms of service. Facebook loosened some of its terms of service. And so it just felt like woke was just getting fucking annihilated. And so voting for Trump in 24 was kind of like, it's going to be too much of a overcorrection, I suppose. So like a moderate Democrat would actually be where we should be. Because if woke is getting absolutely fucking annihilated on social media right now, then MAGA running away with the ball is going to tip the ship too far right. And I do feel like the ship has been tipped too far right.
That's interesting. And so I hear you. And again, I think like that makes sense. And that's like a calculation that I can understand. Again, when I was trying to similarly do a calculation. Now, to explain myself a little bit more, it's not that I thought like between 2022 and 2024 that woke was getting worse necessarily, although I certainly don't think it died or was dying. It's more that I became aware of the water I was swimming in, realized it was wrong and harmful. So I'm not like a left me person, although in some ways I do think the left continues to move left, but I moved right. I said like, wow, my anti-racist framework is fucking racist, and I had a series of these types of, of
so why
discoveries and whatever.
That would naturally, in my opinion, that would kind of like naturally lead to liberal, right? Because the liberals are like
I call myself a
anti-racist, but they're
liberal.
individualist.
They're not.
Sorry, go ahead.
They're literally not, though. So I do call myself a liberal. Like,
Okay.
Which is a word that I didn't use when I was on the left. I saw it as a slur. Liberal basically meant right wing, you know. Liberal meant the Democrats who get cozy with the right wingers. And then I reclaimed it. I've gone back and forth, but no, I do consider myself a liberal. I think I am in the meaningful terms, at least a classical liberal, you know, in the ways that sort of invokes some libertarianism, you know, and some conservatism. Like that's how I see myself. But the Dem liberals I don't want to say talk a big game. I'm not even
go for it,
so
because
much.
you're probably going to articulate some of my frustration with liberals right now. Besides Hutch,
they're not actually individualistic. They're not, like, even if they want to be, maybe some of them, they're better angels, like, do want to bring them away from where the left has drifted. But I think basically even the least woke people on the left have absorbed so much of it. It has just been in the water that they've been swimming in for so long that they've absorbed a ton of this. Like, again, even the most based moderate liberals, whatever, that we talk to, you know, in this online space, think that ending affirmative action is a social atrocity that is going to condemn, you know, Black and brown people to impoverished conditions for the rest of their, you know, for the rest of the future of America. So I think, like, even the ones who basically, to put it a little tighter, I think the only meaningful difference that I see is that there are liberals who have said, okay, guys, the optics of all of this stuff was really bad. We shouldn't be leading with it. You know, we shouldn't be asking everyone their pronouns when we walk into the room, but they haven't actually walked back in any way what their policy prescriptions would be, or the way they frame the world, basically.
I find that interesting. Maybe I'm too internet brained, and I've been swimming in different political waters for too long or whatever. But effectively, like, I just keeping it in the online political realm, because I feel like we're familiar with all these characters. And I know that's not indicative of where the country is as a whole. So just let me use my internet brain real quick. So what happened was, in my opinion, Stephen Bennell II, you know, who the world revolves around, was trying to steelman the progressive leftist bullshit. And so he would steelman intersectionality, or he would steelman systemic racism, or he would steelman, you know, left-wing redistributive economics and social democracy. But then, and he palled around with Hassan Piker and with Vosh for a long time, because I felt like he thought that they were a part of the same team in reference to fighting the right. But what he found was that they were interested in him partnering with them to boost social media clout, influence, et cetera, but they weren't interested in giving like any kind of concession whatsoever to a liberal worldview. And he started viewing them as like rivals within this project who wanted to co-opt and ultimately destroy what he valued about the left, which was freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, actual true liberalism, even if he's like a redistributive economics guy. So he kind of started this like violent, in my opinion, detachment from trans ideology, from socialism, from communism, from Hassan Piker, from Vosh, and fought them viscerally on some pretty like aggressive topics that weren't necessarily popular. Like the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing was like a giant...
Destiny was doing God's work, yes.
Right. It was a giant glass of fresh water for me, because I was like, holy shit, he's just describing reality as I see it, and he's willing to take a metrics and optics hit to describe what is actually descriptively true. And so I really valued that about him in that fight. He never became a Republican, like he was never like a social conservative, but he was still willing to draw that line and fight. And so for me, I guess my frustration where it feels like you jumped to the Republican Party, I suppose, in reference to the same shit that was pissing off Destiny, is I feel like Hutch and Desi and I truly disagree on some political perspectives and ideology and shit, but they value a free society. They value a republic. They value the Constitution of the United States. And so I don't want to say, fuck you.
In a way that they are like,
Sorry, go ahead.
so you would even agree, I think, that they're kind of the minority, even amongst this minority of internet world that we're living
online political. So that's actually what's really scary to me. What's really scary to me is when you talk about the real world, I don't think they're in the political minority. I think they're actually in like a pretty solid majority. But when you talk about the online realm, it looks like they're getting fucking punched from like all angles. And it's scary because the same way that the right wing, and I'm sorry for yapping so much, but the same way that the Overton window was yanked right and then bled into real politics,
which it needed.
It feels like on the left, it's being yanked left and it's going to bleed into real world politics. And it scares the fuck out of me. That's what I fight Pisco on.
But I think you're acceding, you're conceding to acceding. I don't know the correct word here, but you're basically saying, "Oh, that scares me," but I guess I'll do it. I mean, if you're going to sit there and say, "Well, yeah, we should be voting for Graham Plattner over,"
but wait, but Destiny said yesterday when he was like reacting to the Taylor Lorenz on Live and Learn thing, and he was saying himself that like in this sphere of the political online world, whatever, that he is considered like more moderate or centristy left or whatever it is. But in the real world, he would be considered like a far further left progressive comparatively to other people. So that is like how he sees himself, like juxtaposed like the rest of the population. So I don't know if that's like,
I do wonder how much of that is like sex, I don't know. Though. Because he has like a lot of like neoliberal economic takes where he's like, get good, five head, just move, like he has a lot of like laissez-faire capitalist takes. I wonder if he would be considered more progressive though, just because he's bisexual and he doesn't like homophobia, and if there was a sufficiently hot trans girl with a penis, he would probably date her. And so like you have like brunch wine mom libs who are going to be maybe not like, they're not going to like hate their trans kids and they're not going to hate their gay kids or whatever, but they're going to live a much more sexually conservative life and have the same economics as Steven, but Steven's sexual prescriptions are going to be way more extreme than theirs. And I think brunch wine moms are infinitely more populous than online leftists, although online leftists are incredibly fucking loud.
Wait, you think brunch wine moms are more populist than online leftists?
No, populous. There are more of them.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. Not IST. OUS.
US. Yeah. Okay.
So wait, hold on. How does voting Plattner over Susan Collins like achieve anything that you want other than just like saying fuck you to all Republicans?
Well, yeah,
because she is like,
that's a great question.
She is like the most moderate of Republicans. When you look at her voting record, she is like, when they plotted out on the things, she is like closer to Democrats. She voted to impeach Trump on his second impeachment. She voted against him for the Iran war like last week. So she is not it's not her in that regard.
It's not her on a specific level. Obviously, like if the Republican Party is going to reform, we need more Susan Collinses, right? But it's a collateral damage calculation. So what happens? Let's say that it's 50-50 Senate, right? And so it's a Democratic controlled House. So at that point, and I know we don't agree on the Epstein files, but and maybe we actually agree on this point. We might not agree on how big of a part of the calculation it should be. But a 51-49 Democratic seat, I don't think they have any reason not to compel the executive to basically follow through with the law, or else they'll be held in contempt of Congress. And so I see them as more likely to hold the executive branch accountable for malfeasance, particularly when it comes to the Epstein files, but also in reference to, let's say we had another Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and there was like the Supreme Court says you need to facilitate the return of this person in order to reprocess them in order to get it out. I know that's a process thing, but process matters. And so if the Democrats moral effed about, you know, another Kilmar Abrego Garcia, then we're more likely to reaffirm the sanctity of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. And so that's the kind of thing. They could be doing it for the wrong reasons. They could be going after Trump and holding him accountable to the law because they just don't like Trump and Trump bad. But that doesn't matter to me as long as the Republic and the Constitution gets like solidly reaffirmed and the guardrails are held. Whereas with
and you don't
Collins,
think Collins would vote that way?
Maybe she would if she's a consistent enough defector that you could show. And by the way, like I don't pay attention enough to the personalities in Congress, but let's say that your characterization of her is correct, that she's effectively like my dream Republican. And when it comes to the Epstein files or when it comes to the impeachment votes, she's actually one of the Republican defectors that's enabling the accountability that I'm looking for. Then I think that if you make the argument, you can have your cake and eat it too, where you can have Susan Collins as a Republican defector and achieve everything you want to achieve, but you don't have to give an additional Senate seat to a far lefty freak. I mean, that's a compelling argument.
Well, yeah. And I think too, it's like, these are like, what I hear a lot of, first of all, there is like, I just want to acknowledge this is a logical conclusion to draw, or rather, you know, like it's not like a ridiculous, like if your priority is the Dems having control in the Senate in the short term, then yes, then you vote blue no matter who, right? Which is the line that every single person in this little online world that we live in has taken to you know, much to my dismay personally. But I guess my point is, what if that means that instead of a Susan Collins, the next person running for that seat in Maine is someone who's way more MAGA, or frankly post MAGA? Because again, I think you should be too, I am more concerned about the sort of post-liberal part of the right that is post MAGA, that is already turning on MAGA in their ways, you know what I mean? Who's to say that we're not going to get someone like that, as opposed to a more totally chill, you know, back to the 1990s, you know, back to a what's his face, the 2008.
Even Bush, pre-Iraq war,
yes, sure,
would be fucking great.
Fuck it, Bush post-Iraq war. But so I think basically, so basically, and I'm saying this as someone who I think that this failed for me personally. It wasn't the entire reason for my vote in 2024. It certainly wasn't. And it wasn't even necessarily so conscious. Like I wasn't framing it contemporaneously as an accelerationist move. But in hindsight, that is what I was hoping to do. I was hoping that to teach them a lesson, teach the Dems a lesson, so that they will come out as a reformed version of themselves, basically as a more normal version of themselves. And I don't think that has happened. And I worry that your goal of ending MAGA-ism in the Republican Party so that it becomes something respectable that you can join again, that you are actually going to work against your goal by allowing in more extremists on the left in the interim. And by the way, once they're in, they're in. We know this. It's hard to unseat people. They instantly, they have incumbency advantage. They have name recognition advantage. Yeah, so you're putting people, we know, I mean, this is a complaint that lots of people have on term limits and stuff. We know that many of these people will then become lifetime politicians, right, in that very seat. So maybe we should be taking very seriously who we are endorsing and who we are trying to put into these positions, especially if we're not doing it on the merits of that person. If they are essentially a chess piece in this larger game of blocking, you know, a MAGA Senate in 2026 and reforming the Republican Party in 2028, maybe we need to take very seriously who we're allowing onto the game board, you know, at that point.
Yeah, it's true. And this is probably way too memey for the how serious this conversation is. But basically, like, I did think it was a great bit where Pisco was like, I'm voting for I said, you're voting for Plattner because he's a progressive. I'm voting for Plattner because he's a Nazi. Like, that was so fucking, all right.
Yeah.
Memes aside. No. That's probably prudent. I do want to say that my chat is contending whether or not Collins is this ideal Republican because she had the opportunity to vote for conviction for Donald Trump and abstain from doing so. But let's put that aside real quick. Because I think I
But
just have an analogy.
most of your chat would not vote for an ideal Republican, even if they were an ideal Republican. Even if Susan Collins voted to convict,
No,
most
I
of your
literally
chat would never
did a
even
poll.
consider her.
70% of my chat is 70% of my chat are liberals. The hold up though. So fuck, don't lose it. It's right there. Collins voting. Oh, okay. The analogy. So this is where I think that even if we disagree on the amount of damage done, I hope we can analogize this conversation, and then you can at least understand where I'm at. So indulge me a 60-second rant. So we had a deep freeze in Florida, and it killed a bunch of dead shit. It killed like the top layer of a lot of our trees and bushes. And so my mom, God bless her, she forced me to go out into the yard and hack out all the dead shit. And I was like, why the fuck are we doing this? It's fucking silly. It's a waste of time. The shit's just going to grow back. Why are we hacking out all the dead shit? There has to be some kind of natural process where the dead shit fucking goes away. And she's like, yes, fire. And I was like, oh. It's so like, the truth is that like the natural process is that you have a controlled burn. And then that resets the soil, and then, the dead shit's gone and the new shit's there and all that kind of stuff. And so what we're arguing from like a metaphorical perspective is you're saying, hey, a healthy plant or a healthy limb is going to be obviously consumed in this fire to start your allegedly controlled burn. And in the aftermath of this controlled burn, you have no idea what's going to grow back. It could be the plants that you hate that you are saying are like vines and, they're fucking weeds and they're shit. And then that's not only true on the right, that's also true on the left. Because if anything,
and the people who are controlling your burn do want to burn down the entire right side of that body. They do want to make sure that
they are confident that the controlled burn will burn more of the right than it will burn the left, and they'll be able to grow back stronger than the right. But the truth is that within this like metaphor or analogy standpoint, for me, I see so much like dead fuel on the right. And I actually want to make a concession to like having to destroy the MAGA movement thing. I want to talk about that too. But basically, there's so much dead fuel on the right that I don't see how we move past this until we have the fire. And you're totally right. Nobody knows what the fuck happens after the controlled burn. Is it going to be like a healthy forest? Is it going to be a dying forest? Is it going to be a dead forest?
So you acknowledge that you are just taking the accelerationist path right now.
That
sounds like an acknowledgement of it.
Insofar as I'm using the metaphor for a fire, but the fire that I want to set is still like a very proceduralist, like legalistic thing, right? So for instance, like as a matter of fact, continuing with the analogy, Destiny and the fucking rad libs, they just want an uncontrolled fire. They just want to burn everything and everyone. They don't give a fuck what survives the fire. Whereas effectively within my metaphor, I'm saying like, no. We have to follow the rules. We have to have fire breaks. We have to, clear out the fuel in this area and that area. And I would say that's an appeal to like the structure of constitutionalism, legalistic limits, and all that kind of stuff. Because, for instance, soy pill is probably the worst example of this. Continuing with the metaphor, sorry if the metaphor is getting murky, but Soy Pill said that if we failed to impeach Donald Trump and if we failed to incarcerate him after he's out of office, then somebody should just bite the bullet and kill him because he's such a political threat to the American zeitgeist that is like necessary. And for me, that's like, no, that's an uncontrolled burn. You are fucking leaving the parameters of what is sane, and you're inviting greater disaster by doing so.
Yeah, that's just like completely fucking whatever. Like,
well, it's delusional.
Not even like it's not even a
schizophrenia, but yeah,
even,
like we still have to contend with it because he's a creator in our space.
Sure, but like yes, but I just don't see like how this metaphor burns Democrats at all. It looks like it's just burning a moderate Republican. This doesn't track for me. And maybe like I'm too slow and don't see it here. But if you were taking out like a MAGA person, then maybe I could see that. But you're essentially taking out somebody moderate and putting in somebody who's populist and who has some of the same, what you want to talk about, like the disqualifications, like the things that make Trump, like, you know, disqualified to hold office, that Putner has some of those same issues on a smaller level, but like there are some things there in his background that could be disqualifying for him as well, and giving him, you know,
because
ascendancy. Like, how does that make?
It's the moderates. It's, in my opinion, it's the moderates' fault. Okay. So if you go back to Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and JD
But
Vance,
how does
in
burning them all
2016,
down make it put us in a better position? Even it, sure,
because we have
and by
to
the way,
reckon
radical?
with what we've done.
the same thing, but the same thing can be said for the left. It's the moderates' fault. It sort of goes to what I was saying earlier, that even the most sort of moderate, normal people on the left, who, you know, in my lesser of two evils, whatever calculation that I would want to support or whatever, they also have ceded so much
They're
ground.
failing.
But I don't want to burn them down either, and that's the problem. And I think I partially, again, I don't regret. Just to reiterate for the 100th time, so everyone can hate me again, I don't regret my vote in 2024. But that didn't work in 2024, right? Punishing, you know, because, you know, for all the things that people want to say about Kamala, the reason that I don't like to engage in the, like, show me how Kamala was so much crazier, you know, whatever. She's not that crazy. I'm not saying that she was some like radical extremist. She ran on a lot of like cringe woke things in 2020, whatever, that she then like,
not 19. Somebody was saying Kamala's not a progressive, and I was like, dude, I can see the 2019 primary footage. I know what the fuck she was. Don't piss on my leg.
But in the way that, like,
she
honestly,
pandered to moderates in 2024, which is part of the reason why I was okay with voting for her.
Yeah, right. But so it's not that Kamala was so crazy, but it didn't. Her losing did not birth a bunch of normal moderate Dems to try to take over the party, and I am worried that is what you're setting yourself up for on the right. And again, part of me, the thing is, like, even though I agree with what Kay's saying, to me, if you're playing partisan sports, which I say that almost as a pejorative, but I really don't mean it to be, because like that is what politics is at a certain level, right? You do have to just like make these sort of like top level choices. So it is logically consistent that if you want Dems to have power, you vote for every Dem everywhere. Doesn't matter if you think that like the Republican is a better person or someone you might want to hang out with more or whatever. So I understand it logically, but it doesn't seem that your goal is for Dems. If I'm believing you, if I'm believing what's in your heart, your goal is not for Dems to reign for 100 years to come, right?
No, I can't wait for 2028 because I'm hoping I can backstab the fuck out of them.
Yes, but I worry that what you're doing now is not actually in service to that end goal. And again, I think it's understandable because I think in some ways I did the same thing. I don't think it's going to work out.
It might not be, but I want to explain 2 ideas that I think parallel with this, okay? So I don't think that the moderates are losing for a lack of trying, okay? They're losing for a lack of intelligence. They're losing for a lack of having like an immune system. I don't know if you've seen those like Pod Save America fucking interviews with Hassan Piker, or seen those fucking like normie interviews with Hassan Piker, but it's like he's like a virus or a contagion, and they truly do not have the antibodies to defend themselves. It's like he will say some of the wildest shit in the most tepid way possible, and they don't even recognize it as wild shit because they do not have like anti-leftist antibodies. It's literally like watching a fucking
because they
kid
are
with AIDS catch a cold. That's what it's like.
Listen, I know that this was like a splitting point for you and Ryan, but like it's because kind of the entire left is progressive if we're looking at progressivism of, you know, what it sort of meant in the 1920s or whatever. And that goes to my point again, because the left is quite left. I know people will say, oh, not compared to Europe and whatever. And like, sure, yes, when you have 12 parties and everyone can grind down into these very specific policies, sure. But it's because that is the water they are swimming in.
My
it's also,
my thing is though is so
sorry, it's also part of, sorry, really quickly. It's also
no, go ahead.
partially because of just how negatively polarized we all are, which again is what me. I want all of us to be rooting for the moderate candidates on both sides, you know? And so in this
Sure.
one, but I'm also not, I don't see MAGA as the same threat as you do. So I understand why we would come to a different conclusion in this point. But so if I'm looking at the main Senate seat, Susan Collins is the moderate, normal person who I want. You know, I want both parties to look like that moving forward. And I think, like, again, it's the negative polarization that makes both sides maybe even unknowingly, unintentionally double down on some of this stuff. I remember when I was still considered myself on the left, but was trying to fight the left to not be so crazy and whatever. There were liberals defending Marxism because Marxist is a slur. It is truly a slur used by people on the right to just like, you know, to paint everybody. But then there were liberals defending Marxism just because I need to go against whatever they're against. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
no, one of the most frustrating developments for me as like a fucking right winger who I think is relatively smart is like for me it's like the bell curve meme where it's kind of like, you know, basically like on average I think it's just probably proportionally true that the average liberal is smarter than the average conservative. But I think that if you look at the average liberal, they're still a fucking dipshit. And they think that because they're smarter than the average conservative, they're smart in general. And that's not true at all. And I think that is like, so for instance, like reflexively defending Marxism as a concept because it's used as a slur against left-leaning people. That's the kind of stupidity that I think like a 105 IQ person could easily fall into.
Well, no, it's the type of stupidity that only 130 IQ person could fall into because you can convince yourself of anything. The smarter that you are, you can create.
The better you are at post hoc rationalization. That's absolutely true, and I resemble that remark. But so what you said though, which is just true. Okay, this is just true. I feel like returning to the analogy, even if it's not necessarily serving us very specifically, what you're saying is, hey, the force isn't as bad as you think it is. We can regrow based off of what we have right now. And if you initiate a controlled burn the way that you think you're going to, and also let's use Plattner specifically, if you use this fuel in order to set your controlled burn, you might set more of the forest on fire, and it's going to damage the very thing that you're trying to save. That's what you're telling me. And so just continuing with the analogy, even if it's very non-specific, it's like, that is just true. And I think that we're trying to figure out, you and I and Miss K here, we're trying to figure out, even with our limited power and our limited ability to even comment on politics and the internet, we're just trying to figure out the best way to like regrow the fucking forest. You know?
Yeah.
So I can't say, no, you're fucking crazy. You know, Plattner's fine. He's a moderate. Like, no, I can't say any of that shit. And then likewise, if I wanted to accept what you're saying, where Susan Collins or Miss Collins is the exact kind of Republican that I'm looking for, then I can't, you know, I would actually have to go read her shit and see how much did she sell out and how much was she being pragmatic. And is she the kind of person that I'm looking for? I would have to do substantial more research. And even then, let's say that she is the perfect Republican. I still have to say, what degree of collateral damage do I think it's worth in order to strangle MAGA while it's weak? And sorry, I know I'm yapping. I promise I'll try to
No. You just made it clear for me, actually. So finish your point, and then I'm going to try to synthesize.
And MAGA, here's the thing. So it might be idealistic to believe that you can expel MAGA. There's still going to be a power block. And then MAGA is motivated by effectively like economic, cultural, and political disenfranchisement of Americans. And that resentment isn't going away. So how do you address the grievances that are motivating MAGA without being sucked into a cult of personality around a dictatorial figure?
Yeah, I think basically, well, someone in our chat just said something really funny that is, you're not going to like, but it's hilarious. The perfect Republican to counterpoints is a Democrat.
Fuck you.
Anyway,
Democrats would have to stop being so fucking cringe about geopolitics.
They wouldn't because you will just vote for them right now, just nonstop. You will just dole out all the votes and endorsements. So right now they actually don't need to change anything. That person has a fair point right now. I believe you in your soul, Connor. I love when you go on your riffs, your conservative riffs. I really do believe you. Which is why, again, I'm concerned that you're going to be setting the stage for something that you're never going to be able to turn back to it, really. But I think essentially what this boils down to is what we're more concerned about. Whether you are more, it's whether your concern is MAGA or what's waiting in the wings on both sides. And I am way more concerned about what is waiting in the wings on both sides than I am about the fascistic nature of the MAGA government right now.
Let me hit you with a lib shit argument, though. So for instance, like I am worried about people using social democracy is just in my opinion is Scandinavian economics, right? You have this like robust welfare state, but everybody works their asses off, everybody pays a shitload of taxes, and then you have a robust welfare state that helps people when they need help. That actually like I'm not like principally opposed to that. I just think that Americans themselves are incapable. like they love their freedom too much. They don't want to spend that much on taxes. They don't want to work that hard. They don't want to be that like socially cohered around being a cog in the machine. So it's not like I'm principally opposed to
I think that you're actually being unfair to Americans. Americans love to work hard. Americans work arguably we grind much more than many other countries. I actually there's this person I know in not my hometown where I live now who's like moving to Europe, and his whole thing is like, in Europe they don't ask you what you do, they ask you who you are, and like he's trying to like escape the grind culture of America. And like there's something to that, but that's also what brings people here, because you can attain great success. You really can change your life and your family's lives and your community, right? One person can do that here in America. But I think like it's not like, so it's not that Americans don't want to work as hard and whatever, and don't, it's that the size and scale and makeup of America is different. So yes, in Sweden, they can do this because they have a small homogenous population. Sweden is like literally the size of New York City. Like, so maybe New York City could have a super robust welfare system, and it might work out.
No, it should be state level, 100%.
Which is an argument, which is not what the left wants to do. That's not how
they want it at the federal level, which is silly. Yeah, like, dude, run your fucking robust welfare state in California. All the Californians will probably fucking love it. Let Texas and Florida.
Probably too big to do it too. I mean, these things are honestly probably too big. But yes, sure, try it at the local.
Let Texas and by the way, there are smaller Florida levels than the state even. Yeah, let Texas and Florida be schizophrenic, Darwinian, low tax haven, fucking gunshine, fucking psycho places, and people who live there will love that shit too. I think it should be down to the states, but getting away from technocratic bullshit. The argument from the liberals, though, is that while, and this is my concern, the leftists are seizing increasing market share of the internet, they're still not a large voting bloc. Most kids who think that they're socialists are actually Scandinavian social democrats. Most of the people who claim that they're fucking socialists or communists or whatever, they don't even know what the fucking word means. They actually unironically believe that socialism is when the government does stuff. And then effectively like the Hassan Pikers of the world are shadows on the wall. And then this goes back to AOC and Plattner and Zoran Mamdani. They can talk all that shit about being democratic fucking socialists in the primary and in the fucking general. But the second they actually touch American institutions, they have to become political pragmatists. And as soon as they become political pragmatists, they basically have to govern as progressive Democrats. And so what they're saying is, while the fear of the extremism on the left is, I don't even know if they would say real, but it's like, it's prevalent in online political circles. When it actually hits the American zeitgeist or when it hits the American state, it doesn't become communism or socialism overnight. Whereas when we're looking at the way that MAGA has ruled, it has become narco-tyrannic techno-feudalism oligarchical kleptocracy.
It doesn't happen overnight, but it's been moving in that direction. Like if you look back like 30 years ago, like so where you can maybe kind of remember what the world was like, but you were still fairly young, to comparatively to now, like the drag and the pull leftward, it is very noticeable. Like it's very noticeable. It's not happening overnight, right? It's
what is your example? So for instance, like when you bring up like social issues, like when you bring up social issues, I think I can see it exactly what you're saying. But in reference to economics, do you have an example?
Well, how about the size and the scope of the federal government? I mean, it's simply.
But weirdly enough, I blame Bush for that because the war on terror substantially expanded the executive state.
Sure, but that's still a move to the left economically.
Well, I think what happened was we fought the war on terror and we spent trillions of dollars overseas. And then effectively what happened was like, okay, well, we have money for fucking endless war overseas. Why don't we have money for Americans? And then Obama was able to use that kind of rhetoric in order to pass the ACA. But yeah, like I guess the ACA is honestly probably the biggest shift leftward, which was an attempt to grant not universal healthcare, but universal access to healthcare. Yeah, so I mean, I could concede that as like an economic shift, and then now they're saying it's not enough. So
well, and it doesn't need to be. I think this is another interesting thing where I really appreciate like Ryan's contribution to this conversation, because it also doesn't need, not that he said this exactly, but I think this is sort of some of what he's getting at. It doesn't need to be communism to be bad and anti-American, right? So there's a lot of progressive democratic policies and beliefs that are, in my view, anti-American, right? Like counter to the American proposition, right? In that way, and just like bad policy, bad.
Can I ask you a question though?
Bad, sure.
So this is part of the reason why I'm enjoying my conversations with Ryan so much, is because I feel like he set up a really interesting frame where you can identify what is like American or quote unquote good for America based off of whether or not it gets us closer to our founding documents, espoused principles in the Constitution of the United States, or if it gets us further away. And so therefore there can be good progress and there can be bad progress. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, what he said, though, is that like in order to, well, number one, he was saying that the welfare state since the 1920s is like indefensibly anti-American and therefore should be thrown out. I might have been propagandized too much in order to agree with him. But then the other thing is, he said you must identify with these like I don't know if presupposition is the right word, but you must identify with these statements, or else you're not honoring the concept of Americanism. And so one of those statements was that all human beings, it's like God created all men as equal. And he basically said like, well, the way that we would understand this contextually is that all humans are of equal moral worth. And then I was like, society is good when we treat people as though they are of equal moral worth. But I don't know if I truly believe that humans are of equal moral worth. And so that's where I was like, is it a noble
conversation? Yeah, but I think that conversation gave to take a Connorism gave me psychic damage, because really you're making like, yes, PDF grapists are not of the same moral worth as you, but that's not the argument that Ryan's making. That's not the argument that the founders were making. They're literally saying when you enter this world, and actually, ironically, I don't know if I was watching some Destiny videos on the plane. I just got back to Hawaii. And so I'm not sure if this was this might've been like from last week or whatever. It was relatively recent, but Destiny in his way was trying to shit on kind of Destiny affirmed and was trying to shit on the sort of like foundational principle, right? The American moral proposition. Because he was saying too, his point, he was like, who cares about God? This is not about, he's like, it's not that Jesus, gave you these rights or whatever. Destiny's like, the whole point that the founders were trying to make, yes, they were mostly religious, but that was not their point. The point is that your rights come from something beyond and above government, that the government is not what gives you your rights, that it comes from, and it's like, yes, wait, pause, and there, yep, exactly. Yeah. Ryan would agree with that 100%. So it's not so much about believing in the exact same God that imbued these same things. It's saying basically that your rights and your worth are not dependent on the government, that if anything, the government is there to secure these God-given, universe-given, right, whatever like paradigm you need to look at it through, human-given, right? Maybe I'm sure there's like I haven't gone into the way to
like a
to
zeitgeist
talk about this, right?
Yeah.
Right, but right. So
well, but then that, and sorry for being autistic, but the thing about that is, so then we kind of get into like the Andrew Wilson like force doctrine argumentation, which by the way I agree with, and then so here's my mystical deistic pursuit, okay, like logos, the pursuit of like truth, insofar as I can possibly understand it. So I think that there is probably ultimately a way, the same way that we evolved our understanding of slavery over the past 3,000 years, where, 3,000 years ago, nobody would have given a shit about slavery. Whereas like chattel slavery in the 19th century was particularly like nefarious in a lot of ways. But then in the 20th century, we're like, no, it would never be appropriate for anybody to compel another human being of free will against their will for a purpose that wasn't absolutely necessary to secure society. Like we kind of like shifted to this voluntary conception of like human will. And so, but now that we're here at this voluntary conception of human will, it feels like that should have been the law since the beginning, and it should be the law in perpetuity. But very clearly what's actually happened is like sociological and technological development have informed the way that we perceive these ideas. And so as a result, our understanding of slavery has evolved. And by the way, I think
from
this
Ryan's
is going to happen.
From Ryan's perspective, we were not adhering to the American moral principle, right? When slavery was legal, the government was not actually protecting people's natural rights. So it was a failing that was corrected, not a change.
But I want to give you an additional example, and not only do I want to give you an additional example, I want to point to what I'm getting at. So animal rights, like the way that we harvest and industrialize the consumption of animals. I think that as technology evolves and we increasingly become capable of humane harvesting of animals and giving them better quality lives before we harvest them, and especially after we perfect lab meat, then the consumption of animals is going to be viewed as like a human barbarism analogous to slavery. We're going to be like, why the fuck were we ever treating sentient creatures the way that we used to treat them? And the truth is that it's going to be like technologically and culturally dependent, but it's going to evolve morally along with technology and culture. So my point there is that like, there's something that we're struggling towards. It's like a harmonic balance of will and humanity and biology and environmentalism. We're trying to get somewhere that feels just. And so for me, I feel like that's from God. We are trying to scratch at this like sense of truth and belonging and harmony and all that kind of stuff. And I think that comes from a higher creative ordered force. But then when I go to my next door neighbor and they're like, I don't believe in any of that shit. I just think you're like a voodoo schizophrenic who's trying to post hoc rationalize religion. That way you don't have to reject the religion of your parents. You can just turn it into this voodoo nonsense because you feel lost without it. I don't really have like a strong counter argument. Maybe that is what I'm doing. So that's where you have to, in order to believe in the American, it comes from a higher ordered power, you have to buy into this voodoo.
But that's the thing is I think you don't. And I think Destiny kind of maybe unintentionally exemplified that just a few days ago or whatever, when he went on this rant. And listen, I hear you. And I maybe in a slightly different way, I share your concern about especially because I buy into it so much. I think this is the way that we should be framing this, right? That we are not especially as a counter to some of the really ugly nationalism that we're seeing creep in on the right. This is a good counter that no, we are not a nation of like some specific, you know, European peoples. We are a nation founded on this moral principle, right? And what I agree with you, the shortcoming is that like it was sort of partially in like Pisco's debate with Ryan, which is just that it's almost not an argument. It's rather like an is versus ought, right? So it's like Ryan's argument is we ought treat this as the founding principle of America, you know, because it was, right, and we ought to get back to that, and we ought to all, you know, take pride in that and approximate toward that. Whereas I think like the good point of the sort of is perspective is like, well, not all Americans agree that that's what it is. I think those Americans have been led astray, right? So there's like, I agree that it can break down on that level of just like, but literally not everyone believes this, and it's like, okay, sure.
But I want to go one step deeper.
Okay.
Is it true? So for instance, like logos, at least in like the biblical conception of it as it's been regurgitated to me, is that like godliness or divinity or whatever is supposed to be associated with the concept of spoken truth. And so that's part of the reason why lying is prohibited in the Ten Commandments, and part of the reason why like earnest, honest communication is so emphasized throughout Scripture is because when you are dealing in truth, your ability to orient yourself within the world justly is supposed to increase manifold. Like, whereas if you're dealing in lies and deception and manipulation, it becomes really easy to like encumber your soul. And so that's where for me, like, I like the idea of a noble lie because it's so omnipresent in fiction that you can have a like functional society that's built off of a noble lie. And so, you know, it's so I think in nonfiction too, it's omnipresent. But then like what ends up happening is this quote that I can't get away from, which is like, if it can be destroyed by the truth, it should be. And I just feel that in my fucking bones. So
okay, but
if we have to,
be the lie,
if people disagree, that has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. We have to evaluate whether or not it's true.
That what all people are like of equal moral worth, that America
or
is
endowed by
founded
their creator with certain inalienable rights.
Okay, so do you think that any two babies, like born, like infant children, do you see one, like, I don't know, just look, do you think one has more moral worth than the other? Could you make that decision? Do you think anybody could?
Yes, I do. I think that so I said this earlier, we ought treat every infant, and let's keep going with infants because I think this actually gets to the crux of the issue. So I think that we should treat infants as though they have equal moral worth, because there are plenty of disabilities, mental, physical, whatever, and people go on to live like these beautiful lives, right? Even after mental, physical disabilities. And so we ought treat each life as if it has certain moral value. However,
yeah, but to Kay's point, why do they not?
Well, right, exactly. So in the pagan world, we did used to treat malformed infants or infants with obvious physical deformity as not godly, not godlike. And so they made a moral judgment about how they should care for those infants.
Was
and
that
they
true?
chose infanticide. What's that?
Was that true?
That they were not of equal moral worth?
Correct.
Possibly. And by the way,
what
so for instance,
believe?
like,
hold on, what do you believe?
Yeah.
So I think that they probably over infanticided their population. So they would see like
you're saying there was a good happy medium that they should have stopped at.
Correct. But weirdly enough, I think that you might agree with me. So for instance, there are horrific genetic abnormalities where an infant is born and their existence is suffering, like just suffering for like 2 or 3 weeks until they die. And so in that thing, maybe moral worth isn't the correct consideration because you're actually
I would
honoring
say it's clearly not the right.
You're honoring the moral worth by euthanizing the child, but at the same time, like, you know, you are choosing to end a life because you think one life is not worth living, and you're perpetuating a life because you do think it's worth living, and there's a judgment there.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, that's why there are, like, we should be very careful when we play God in that way. Absolutely. But I think you even sort of answered your question right there, which even when they were making those types of considerations, arguably that was not a consideration based on moral worth. It was a consideration based on life expectancy and quality of life and all of these things. And again, I mean, this is the weird thing about, like,
for the pagans too, though, just real quick, for the pagans, they were making a moral evaluation. They were saying we should not expend collective resources on a malformed child because that is actually going to be bad for our society. So it was a moral calculation for the pagans.
Yeah, they could be wrong.
They could be wrong, but also
I hope
still
so.
Not, but from the way you're describing it, they're still not making a evaluation on the moral worth of the child. They're making a calculation on the benefit to society in some way, the stability of their society. Even that, it doesn't seem like they're actually making the distinction of, and again, moral worth. We could even take moral out of there, right? They are making a calculation based on, like, physical worth. Basic. That's probably an imprecise
productivity
term, right?
and expense.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's actually where I wanted to get back to, because oftentimes moral gets, like, a little shrouded for me because, like, you know, you look up the definition and it's the evaluation of good and bad, and that just feels like very nebulous. But so I use it for everything because
but it's kind of perfect when we're talking about infants, because it's like what can be inherently bad about an infant.
Well, and then that's where I was going to go with a pagan pre-industrial mindset, is effectively like the context of the infant. What can be bad about an infant is if you have a malformed infant and then resources that could be allocated better end up going to sustaining the life of the infant. Well, that could mean the difference between surviving a winter or not surviving a winter. That could mean the difference between having, like, a rival tribe raid your fucking village and start killing people, and you have to try to divert resources to protect this malformed child, whereas if it was an able-bodied child, you would just be able to fight unencumbered. And so that's where, for me, you know, I understand exactly what you're saying. I really do. When you say they're still treating an infant as having equal moral worth, but then they're making non-moral evaluations in order to, based off of the collective and not off, like, of the
utilitarian.
I understand what you're saying.
They're actually not,
but it's close enough. Yeah, it's close enough to me that I feel like you probably understand what I'm saying too, where we're scratching at this concept of what is a human being worth when it comes into this world, and does it start with that equal value? And so I feel like you effectively, like, the reason why you could, I guess, rhetorically defeat me in this argument is because you can make the argument that, like, well, a child with Tay-Sachs that's going to suffer, we're still treating it with moral worth because we're considering it's an individual experience and then we're euthanizing it. But for me, like, I guess I'm evaluating it collectively, where a child with Tay-Sachs does not have the same utility worth, I guess is another way to say it. It doesn't have the same amount of util worth as a properly formed child.
I think you can make this argument in the frame of what you were saying before, which is like, and Kay and I actually had this conversation maybe last week of, like, there's this, like, I want to, like, get at the difference between, like, progressing in the sense of, like, progressivism and just, like, literally time moves forward and technology progresses, right? And so we are suddenly living in a different environment that we have to actually grapple with, right, and exist in. But as opposed to, like, trying to bend towards some utopian, you know, future. But I think, like, you could make the argument that now today we don't have to make those same considerations because we have technology that can improve. I mean, there are several, not for every, but there are many genetic disorders that now, because we understand them and we can test for them, we can treat them immediately when the baby is born, right? And there are a lot of things that can be done to alleviate suffering and to give people a much higher quality of life.
No, that's a good point. And somebody is saying, like, oh, why are we talking about malformed infants? They were talking about, like, kings and queens and shit. I still think all of our argumentation applies. because we are talking about like, what are you endowed with by nature or God?
Right.
And I think, you know, obviously different people are allocated different things based off of the judgments of society. And so I don't think it's at all apparent that basically you're born into this world and you're granted, and I know I'm appealing to society, but that you're like instantaneously granted by God or nature some kind of equality with the rest of humanity. I don't think that's apparent at all. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, and actually I do have to wrap soon, just because I you know, I normally leave at 2:30 and I'm supposed to leave 2 minutes ago, but that's okay. I actually don't have an obligation immediately. But next 13 minutes, I suppose, would be good for me. The individualism. So this could be an anti-American sticking point, but I found a fascist argument inherently compelling in reference to the balance between individuals and collectives. So oftentimes when you talk to libertarians, I feel like this is totally like without evidence. They talk about how like we're all individuals and our individual wills are sacrosanct. And so to violate the individual will is like one of the greatest sins that you can do. And as a result, you should never, you know, violate the individual will, and we could achieve a voluntary society. But then you just basically come in with like collective issues that they don't have answers for. And then they're like, well, on a voluntary basis, we could deal with collective issues. And it's like, okay, fuck you. Like, we just reinvented the government. Shut the fuck up. So, communitarianism, though, is not necessarily a fascist argument, but it was part of it, is that fascists recognize, at least in Giovanni Gentile's own writings, that it's not the individual and it's not the collective. It's not either one of those things. Okay, the individual does have a right, a will, a seat of consciousness, moral value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but their will is not sacrosanct and inviolable. And then the same way, the collective is often used as a pretext to subordinate the will of the individual, and at times unjustly. And that's like people's hostility to collectivism, is that oftentimes appeals to the greater good are used to subordinate the individual in terrible ways. But the truth is that it's an interplay. It's an interplay between the will and intelligence and virtues and vices of an individual and the collective responsibilities of a community. And so effectively, it's a perpetual fight. And so we actually, as societies, have to decide, you know, what are the rights of individuals and what do individuals have the right to say, no, collective, you are not allowed to abuse me in this way because it's unjust. And then the collective actually says, you know what? As an individual part of this collective, that is unjust. And therefore, we will not punish individuals on this level. And so it's an interplay between the two rather than one or the other. And so any ideology that claims to be rabidly collective or rabidly individualistic, I just think is incorrect. I just think it's fundamentally, sociologically, historically, anthropologically, materially fucking incorrect. And a lot of American philosophy is rooted in individualism.
Let me jump in just for the sake of time here. True. I think true. And I don't think like Kay and I are going to push back too much on that. There's good reason, however, to have a libertarian in the room, right? Every time you're making decisions like about the collective or the individual. And I think I find compelling the sort of right wing, maybe even religious. I don't know. I don't even know if you should call it right wing, but the view that doing what is in your self-interest, right? Like helping the people around you is very often in your self-interest, right? And serving yourself so that you can competently care for and manage the people in your environment, right? Is serving the collective. I think too, you get to a problem of like, the collective is dangerous. Mobs are very dangerous, right? And so it's like, yes, we're balancing these things, but with the balance needs to have an emphasis on the individual. Yes, we need to stop the individual will when it then infringes on the rights of another individual. But and this is a problem too. It kind of goes back to similarly what I was saying with like everyone wants to be Sweden, but Sweden is is like 10 million compared to our 360 million, right? Yeah. And so it's like and I think this is something too that's sort of a product also of like the modern era that we're living in. But people feel this obligation to this like very large and sort of ambiguous like group and collective when we actually can't meaningfully impact the collective over there in that way, and in doing so we are severely limiting the rights of the individual. So I agree with you that it is about the
You
interplay,
literally
but
just
I
described every
yeah.
online alt media pundit's career. like
well, yeah,
struggling with this overwhelming zeitgeist and trying to have like a minimal impact that we hope ripples out into the broader zeitgeist. I mean, yeah, that's literally what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
it's important to like set up society so people can choose and figure out how to work within the collective good for people. But I think it's also really important that people opt into doing that for the most part, because like the feeling forced into it doesn't give you any of the benefits that you get from like choosing to be giving, right? Like the compelled.
That's part of the reason why I love it.
Takes it away, right? So we need to set it up. Yeah.
That's part of the reason why I love American republicanism. Because like effectively by substantially reducing the amount of responsibilities that are foisted upon you by the government,
yes.
A lot of our collective responsibilities become voluntary. And you could argue that there's a substantial amount of bad shit that happens as a result of the individual wills of humans clashing against each other. But then I also feel like it does, at least on a personal level, it does feel more like sacred, I suppose, on like an individual level to say, no, I am going to participate in this society voluntarily because I value what it brings to me. And so once again, I have no problems with starting, and I think you said this, Tali, starting from an individual framework and then working your way up to the collective. I have no problems with that. But then I just think that, of course, as with everything, it can go too far. And so a lot of the rugged individualism that made itself up of the Reaganite hyper individualist, fiscal conservative, we don't need anybody, slash the social safety nets, who gives a fuck, like, get good, loser, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I feel like that mentality is oftentimes rooted in American philosophy, but it's gone too fucking far. And like our crumbling infrastructure.
It's gone too far, but arguably that's because like there are sides, and I don't want to make it too simplistic with just like two sides or whatever, but it tends to boil down that way, whatever. Arguably that's because they are like fighting past each other in that way. So like, sure. It's like, yeah, sure, they want to slash the social safety nets. And maybe I wouldn't want to do that because I sincerely want, the single mother of 3 who gets laid off because of the huge cut in funding or whatever, not because she's a bad worker or any other thing, right? Whatever. I don't want her to be out. I don't want her and her babies to be out on their ass. But we have institutions that are basically, once you get on, it can be very, very hard to get off. We're not monitoring them closely. There are terrible incentives that leave generationally, can leave families in a very bad spot because they've become reliant on this. And even the little things, right? It's like people are I worked with homeless populations. People are greatly incentivized not to get a higher paying job because the second you go over that whatever threshold, then you're going to lose all of these safety nets that you had. And so it's like, maybe we need to get to a better place, but I think a lot of the blame for that does come from the collectivists who sort of, once you give and it's not just Americans, that's correct on this last time, once you give people things, once you give them, what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Entitlements, that is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. It's extraordinarily hard to take them away. And so it's so...
Yeah, and
I'm sorry for interrupting.
No. And just some of the, like, I think like the language or the philosophy or what we see people pushing back on that you say is like rooted into American philosophy, I think it is a response to a growing like entitlement culture, if you will. And so people are getting, very upset about it.
But people,
they're not always like the articulation is not always good. But I think if there was a way to bring it down, then some of that discourse would be, quieted, but it would change in its tone and tenor a little bit, right?
I think, yes, but I think a lot of the proletarian masses, which unfortunately I am a part of, I wish I was a technocratic bourgeois elite, but alas, I'm a proletarian mass schlub. I think what people are looking for is they're looking for a fair shake. Okay. What they're looking for is if I am able-bodied and of sound mind, am going to trade 40 to 60 hours worth of labor per week in order to be able to feed myself, clothe myself, live in relative comfort, and be able to raise a family. And that is the trade that they are willing, able, and do not resent as like a social contract. But what's happened, and Tali alluded to this, is through the complexity of our private public hybrid systems, not only does that seem to be difficult, but also you can get stuck in these perverse incentive structures that effectively like keep you stuck at the bottom. And so the reason why I'm a Republican philosophically, but a lot of people are like, Connor, you're voting for Democrats, you're not a Republican, is because what I was told as a child, which I thought was smart, is that technocratic elites, people who are of higher intelligence, oftentimes well-educated, oftentimes very thoughtful, pensive, and ideally, if they're virtuous, should be analyzing these systems and then designing these systems so we don't have these perverse incentives. So we do get people actually socially mobilized from the homeless to the working class and from the working class to the middle class. And we should have the ability.
Dems fight means testing for like almost everything. So yeah, like
well, sure, but that's because they're trying to and this is why I don't like fucking Democrats to some degree, is because they say, oh, well, the abuse of the perverse incentives of the system are so marginal, we shouldn't even care if we have perverse incentives in the system. And that doesn't feel right to working class and middle class people, because working class and middle class people, if people are taking advantage of a financial system, they want to have a sense of fairness. And so we're all like, as proletarian workers, we're like crabs in a bucket where the people who are a part of the system that have perverse incentives say, no, don't take this way. It will fuck me over. And then the working class and middle class say, hey, you should get fucked over because you're playing part of an unfair game. And then we just argue about the fairness of the game or how to create social mobility instead of having technocrats actually craft policy that's good for society.
We're lying about the game though, because even like what you set up, what you said, like sounds very reasonable, and I think is also leads to a communist hellscape of like people expect, that they'll be able to, work hard 40 to 60 hours a week, whatever, and then raise their family, take care of their family. And it's like, well, okay, but that's not exactly true. It kind of depends on what fucking work you're doing for those 40 to 60 hours, sure, whether that should be enough to sustain. And it depends on where you're going to live. And it depends on how you're going to live. Like, and this is, again, part of the right is feeding into this too, because this populist angst is so popular, and that I want to strangle it in the night, because we're selling people a lie. How are we even gonna make good on that promise if not for just more bloat and handing people more fucking money, sure, that they didn't necessarily earn in the marketplace? And so it's like, yeah, it's true. Some people are gonna work 80 hours a week and make not a lot of money, and some people are gonna work 25 hours per week and make a shit ton of money. But that's the beauty of like the freedom in America too, to sort of build your own path. And this is what had everyone yelling at Ben Shapiro, right? When he said, actually, no, it's not your God-given right to raise a family in the same town that your parents raised you in. Mm-hmm. You might actually need to go seek opportunities in a different part of the country. You might actually need to live differently. And it's like, there's just major entitlement too that I think is literally going to walk us, because the only way, Connor, for everyone to work 40 hours per week and make sure that they're all getting enough money is socialism, is a government prescribed job with a government prescribed salary to make sure that it's being split adequately enough that everyone is, even if they're not going to have enough to live comfortably, they'll all have the same, so at least they won't resent each other. Like, how is that not the end state of what you're talking about?
I don't know. I don't think that's true. And so I'm quite specific when I talk about socialism and communism, because I'm very specifically talking about Marxist socialism and Marxist communism, which have specific definitions. But then there's, of course, like the broader definition, which is like and this is like pre-Marxian socialist definition, is like emancipating the working class from the oppressions of capitalism. And I feel like you might be alluding to that a little bit with your previous statement. Like, I don't want to emancipate human beings from every oppression of capitalism, because some of these oppressions are nature. It's literally like, yes, you have to be productive in order to get something out of the world and then put that something on your plate. But
you don't want to do that, and I believe you. But again, I think, but how else do we get without big daddy government? Like, how else do you get that everyone who works 40 hours per week gets to take care of themselves and live well in the city that they're living in?
Arguably, Scandinavian technocracy has to some degree succeeded in this. Like they call it, I think they call it sociologically, like get to Norway. Like they're literally they're looking at the biometrics of the Norwegian people, and they're like, holy shit, these people are kicking so much fucking ass. How do we design a technocratic society in order to get people to the Norwegian outcomes? And oftentimes it's a Norwegian style nanny state, but once again, I actually think that human beings are quite varied, in their outputs, capabilities, intellect, physical abilities. And
which
so
is why I can't be on the left, because the left does believe in a blank slate, whether they're willing, they're willing to make slight concessions.
We can't all be Norwegians, dude. Meet a fucking person from Norway and see if you could deal with all the bull. And by the way, like the weather up there is fucking horrific. So even just like from a living in Norway standpoint, see if you could be Norwegian. So the point is that I think that a technocratic republic is not only possible, but preferable. I just don't know if there's somebody who has the clarity of vision, the virtue, and the technical capacity to rehabilitate our society into that. And the problems that we're talking about are so complex, and it is after 3, so I got to go in a second. But the problems that we're talking about are so complex that effectively it intimidates people out of even fucking trying, right? Like even me, I have a fantasy about becoming popular on the internet and then becoming a congressman and then becoming a senator and then becoming president and then fucking passing beautiful legislation that solves all of America's problems. But then I talk to fucking sitting Congress people and they're like, oh yeah, I'm on a 2-year rotation of fundraising. And so I basically have to win an election every 2 years. So I don't even spend my time writing policy. I spend my time campaigning endlessly. I just fundraise for my party, and I campaign endlessly. And then you talk to a fucking senator, and there's like, you will have to cover your Totenkopf. You know what I'm gonna do? I did the Odyssey games, where I tattooed an astronaut on my chest in order to do it. I'm going to replace my astronaut with a Totenkopf. So
just give your astronaut a little Hitler stash.
Right, there we go. So anyways, I had like another 5-minute rant about how our current system is so daunting in the amount of time and energy you have to pour to ascend to the highest ranks, that effectively by the time you get there, you're either like so corrupted or so disaffected. You're just like, you literally can't even conceptualize crafting good legislation to change America for the better, that you're just like fucking washed. So yeah,
we're too big. We're too big for the type of things that you're talking about.
It is. Yeah. When you said the state shit, I wasn't agreeing with states' rights because I want to bring back slavery. I was agreeing with states because I think that like regionalization of problems is oftentimes where you find the best solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I do have to run, girls.
Yeah.
So
let's do this again sometime.
To my chat and I'll shout myself out to yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are Kay and Tali. We stream 1 to 2 times per week on Kay's channel over here, Morally Loaded. We talk shit. We cover, the news and current events and stuff like that, and our political frustrations in the online sphere. You can find us there on YouTube at Morally Loaded, and then I'm on Twitter at Talibots, TALIBOTZ.
Yep.
All right, cool. And then for the people, including Zero Fucks, who are watching this content, I obviously run Counterpoints Politics, which is my VOD channel, and I stream there once a week on Tuesdays. But then I also stream on Valor Media Network, VALOR, Media Common Spelling Network Common Spelling. I'm live 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. EST. So check me out on Valor Monday through Friday, except for Tuesdays. Catch me on Tuesdays on Counterpoints Politics. And I had fun. I had fun just like last time. So next time I say something cringe that you hate and you want to fight me about it, then let's fight about it again. I had a blast.
Perfect.
Good, Connor. Thanks.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey there.
Grackle just wrote Valor Media, VALER. I always wonder that when he says
Oh.
VALOR Media common spelling. Like, how about Valor common spelling too? Common spelling Valor, common spelling Media, common spelling network. Yeah. All right, what do you think?
Sometimes he does, but yeah. Spell
Okay.
it all out. Yeah. Anyways. Yeah. So that was fun.
What do you think? You think we got? I feel like we were able to get at the meat of our concerns.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to it, I think maybe like in this specific like Plattner Collins debate, if you will, that maybe needs to be more familiar with each of them, and that would factor in differently because I think it is kind of specific to the people, right? It is not just like generic Dem, generic Republican. The argument is not kind of centered on that. It's on this is a more moderate Republican going against what we could consider a more populist, like Democrat with some interesting messaging, a much more progressive messaging. So what does that say if we choose one over the other just on the basis of like wanting to give a big fuck you to the other side? Right. And I think that there's something to like generally contend with of like what makes Trump overall and MAGA, like what is disqualifying about them, and do those same things and those same like qualities that make somebody disqualifiable, if you will, trickle down into the smaller, more local elections. And it's not like, okay, because I can understand that there's like an entire picture, an entire like suite of issues, if you will, but it's not just one thing. Like I get that. It's all the things together. But then how do we like there has to be some way to make sense of it. And when is the emergency over? I'm curious about that. When is the emergency over?
I think that's a really good question that you asked. Right. Like if this is some like temporary posture of correcting something, then when does that end? When is that meaningfully over? Totally. And I think too, to your point, because you got at what I was going to follow up with, which is I can already hear their responses, which it's not all the things about Trump necessarily. It's all the things together and with the power that he has and whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think sort of to your point, and I do feel like we were able to really communicate this to Connor in a way that I think he absorbed meaningfully, which is like, okay, so let's say Trump has all of the things together. But then if you accept and even vote for and promote and endorse Dems who each have, one or two of these things, then how are you not just building up that same? You're adding the ingredients into the stew on the other side in order to kill it on this side, right? And it's again, it's like there's a very clear, logical, understandable case to be made for voting blue no matter who, if that's your prerogative. If your prerogative is just about the balance of power and making sure that MAGA or Trump or his coalition or whatever has as little possible within the second administration as possible, then it's a logically consistent position to take. But I think Connor's true position is more than that, right? He also wants a strong, dignified Republican Party to return to. And I don't think making the left as crazy as possible is going to give us a moderate, dignified Republican Party to return to.
Yes. And if you're a Democrat, I guess I can see that, right? But if you're not necessarily a Democrat, that makes it harder for me to understand that kind of disposition, because I think that there is plenty to be worried about with like Democrats getting all of the power, especially with the way people are talking on like what they want to advocate for doing, if that happens. So I'm not entirely sure there.
Yeah. I think it was a good conversation though.
Yeah, no, so do I. Cool. This week, I don't know if you're around again, we can talk. If not, we will regroup in a bit.
Yeah, I just realized that I haven't even figured out my schedule for this week. But hopefully we can do this again on Friday. That's what I'm like aiming for, a Thursday or Friday for us to be able to do this again. But I'll know better in like an hour.
Okay.
Once we finish stream and I can log into my personal life, then I'll know better what my schedule looks like for this week. Yeah.
Yes, and it's still like first thing in the morning for you. So all good.
True.
It's like only 9 o'clock. Is that
correct?
It? Jesus. Yeah. Okay. It's like I was like getting to the end of my afternoon.
Yeah, you're like planning dinner over here. Yeah.
Yeah, psychologically. All right. Well, thank you, Tali. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. And
thank you, everyone.
Hopefully we see you guys soon.
Yes. Cool beans. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye.